Today's video was inspired by one that Nina Ribena recently put on her channel, and she was using a bokeh effect for a background for some tags that she was making, and I'll pop the link to her video in the description below so you can take a look at it. And it got me to thinking about different ways of creating this effect, and I was sure that there must be different ways, depending on what materials you've got to hand, what products you've got, to create similar effects with your backgrounds. So today is going to be sort of try it and see. I've got a selection of different products, and I'm going to see what sort of effects I can get by using different things. So to begin with, I've got some tags. I've die cut these tags, and I've got some plain ones as well, but these ones I've pre-coloured with some Distress Oxide inks, just a selection of random different colours. And these are what I'm going to be using to put this bokeh effect on. So I'm going to start off with the most obvious one. This is the one that Nina did, the one that a lot of people do, and that's using a white ink. And for all of these, I've created a bit of a template here. This is just a piece of cardstock, and I've die cut some different size circles out of it. You could use punches if you haven't got a die cut set. And I've had a look through my inks, and at the moment the only white ink I've got is this Picket Fence Distress ink. So that's the one I'm using. I have to say it's not my favourite white ink. I'm sorry, Ranger, I love your Distress inks, but I've never been particularly fond of this white one. I don't think it gives as good a white effect as I would like from an ink, but this is what I'm working with today. And basically I'm going to put my stencil that I've made on my tag, and I'm going to apply the white ink through the holes using my foam applicator. And then I'm going to lift that up and move it randomly somewhere else and go through the stencil again. And as you can see, it gives a very subtle effect. This is why I'm somewhat disappointed with this. I was hoping it would have been a brighter white, but for this effect it works quite well. So I'm just going to continue moving the stencil around, overlapping the shapes until I'm happy with the overall effect that I've got. And there, as you can see, that it's a really nice effect. It's a very soft and subtle effect. Some of that is down to the fact that this ink is not the most opaque, but as you can see, that works using a white ink and the stencil. So I'll just clear these away, and we'll move on to the second set of products that I'm going to use today. Okay, next I thought let's try using white paint instead of some ink, and there's lots of different white paints on the market. I've got like normal acrylic paint, I've got white gesso. Obviously with this effect you don't want big harsh white circles, so I'm going to try this translucent white that I've got. This is the Deco Art Media one. I'm sure that you'll get a similar effect with a normal white acrylic paint. Maybe you'll need to add a little bit of water to it, I don't know. But I'm going to pop a little bit of paint on the palette, and I've got a little finger dauber here with a foam tip because I like using these with stencils. And so I'm going to get a little bit of paint onto my foam applicator, then take off the excess. We don't need a lot. And I'm just going to dab through the stencil. A similar fashion that we did with the ink, but this time just using some acrylic paint. And as you can see, it's creating a similar effect. It's not going to be exactly the same. Obviously, we've got a little bit of the texture from the foam in there. It's drying pretty quickly. It's quite a warm day today, so the paint's drying quickly. If not, you could just go in with the heat gun and dry between layers. And again, just continue to move the stencil to different positions, overlapping as we go. And there we have it. Say a different effect to this. This one was a much more subtle effect, and this one's a little more pronounced. But again, it still is that bokeh effect that we're looking for, and a nice way of adding some pattern and depth into a background. So once again, I'll just clean this paint away. Right, this time, and instead of adding some white to our tag, I'm going to use a baby wipe, or you could use a damp cloth, to remove some of the ink. Because I've used distress oxides, or if you were using ordinary distress inks, they're water reactive, and you can blot out and bleach out some of the colour with a damp cloth or a baby wipe. So this time I'm going to try that. Rather than adding white to the top, I'm going to remove some of the colour from the background. I'm just using a light circular motion. Just going to go in to the stencil and take out some of the colour. And again, keep moving the stencil around, overlapping it until I'm happy with the finished result. Every so often might just want to dry this with the heat tool. And again, that's really nice, and we get almost a slightly 3D effect because it's not an even coating here where it's removing the ink, so it's almost showing the highlights and making it quite dimensional. I like that one. That's quite an impressive one. Right, for this technique, I'm going to be using a white spray. This is my Dilutions white linen spray. I thought, why not? Well, I don't use this very often. So I've got a box. This is the box that I put things in to spray. And because I don't want any of the spray to go over the edges of my little stencil, I've just used some washi tape to tape it onto a larger piece of card, just so that I can place it down and it's not going to go around the edge onto my tag. So I'm going to spray through, and with this I'm going to dry each layer in between because I don't want to smudge it when I move my stencil. So hoping that this isn't clogged up because it's a while since I've used it. I'm going to spray it through. Carefully lift that off and dry it with my heat tool. Again, let's just move the position of that, and I've put a new nozzle on. I've got a spare nozzle, so fingers crossed this will spray more evenly, and it does. And again, just drying in between. This is a little more time consuming with having to keep drying it. But it's giving a slightly different effect, which is a nice, I don't want them all to turn out the same. It's giving an interesting texture. And that's a really nice effect. We've got this, we have the speckle from the spray, but it's a nice subtle effect. I do like that one. It's worth that little extra time for drying in between. But yes, that's another way to do it. I do like that. So for anybody who's got one of these white linen sprays and doesn't use it, there's an opportunity to get it out and use it. I'll just clean up my stencil, and then I'll be back again with some more. This time I'm going to try some pastels. I tell you, I really am raiding the shelves at the moment to see what I've got that's white. You might have some chalks. They should work the same if you've just got a chalk. Maybe you've got the little crafting chalks in a palette. These are just some soft pastels, so very similar to a chalk. And I'm just going to go through my stencil with them. I'm not entirely sure how to do this, so I'm just going to apply it and blend out with my fingers. This is working nice. Obviously with chalks and soft pastels, you will need to seal them afterwards with a fixative. You can buy a spray fixative. You can use like a cheap hairspray. I'm not going to seal it now because I'm not actually doing anything with this right now, but just because this can still move if you touch it, it's always best to seal things like this when you've finished. Otherwise it's going to smudge. I mean, obviously with this, because they do move, where it overlaps, we're not going to get the sort of, as in the previous ones, you've got this distinction of where they've overlapped. But here, of course, it'll just blend, unless you fix it in between layers, it's just going to all blend into one shape. But I think that's a really nice effect, and again, a little bit different. So yeah, that's your soft pastels or chalks. Right, so this time let's do something completely different. Who says that we have to have our circles white on a coloured background? I know that the bokeh effect is a light effect. It's what's seen in photography, and you get these little light circles. But it's an interesting effect to use, and I just wondered what would happen if we used some coloured inks on a white background. Would that make an interesting design? So I've got my Distress Oxides, I've got Squeezed Lemonade, Broken China, Cracked Pistachio and Abandoned Coral. And I'm just going to blend those through my stencil over my tag. And again, going to overlap, move and overlap like we did before, and see what kind of an interesting effect we can get. And there we have, I think that's a really nice effect actually. I like that every bit as much as the white circles on the coloured background. Really nice and fresh, especially for sort of spring and summer projects. Again, just a really cool background design. And I've got one more coloured option to go with, so I'm just going to clear these out of the way and just wipe up my mat, and then I'll be right back again. For this tag I'm going to use circles of tissue paper and do the bleeding tissue technique to create a similar effect to this that we did with our distress oxides. This tissue paper is just some from the Works here in the UK. It's just a cheap children's tissue paper. And I used some dies to die cut some circles in the same sizes that I'd cut my little stencil with here. And I've just cut out some circles of tissue in some different colours. Now you could cut them out by hand. You could use a punch, but tissue paper being very, very fine, if you want to punch tissue paper, I'd suggest putting it between two pieces of printer paper and punching through all the layers, because this has a tendency to get jammed in a punch because it's quite fine and soft. But what I'm going to do here is put a little bit of water on my tag to start with. Then I'm going to start layering the tissue on and spritz some more water on the top. I don't want my tag to be too wet, just enough just to start and stick my tissue down. So without too much thought, I'm just going to start layering my pieces of tissue on. They can overlap as I go. And when I'm happy with the amount that I've got on there, I'm just going to add a little bit more water. And I'm just going to leave that to dry. You can already see down here that some of the ink's starting to bleed out of the tissue. Good idea to keep these out of the way while we're spraying the water, because those ones are all wet now. But I am rather a messy crafter. I'm just going to speed this up with my heat tool. And as you can see, as it dries, the pieces will start to flip off. And there we have a really nice pastel effect. Different to the inks, but really nice and effective. And again, maybe you don't have some inks, maybe you don't want to go to the expense of the inks. This tissue paper was only £1 or £2 for a huge pack. There's 80 sheets in that pack, and we used just a little bit there. So I'll just clear these out of the way, and I'll be back again. And finally, Does the bokeh effect have to have circles? No, not at all, not at all. Here I've die cut some stars, I've die cut some hearts, and you can see the hearts on this one here. Really pretty effect. And stars, not so easy to see on this. The colours of inks that I've used are a bit pale, and this white ink is really not showing up, but you might be able to just catch it on the light there. But believe me, that, you know, it's still a pretty effect. So hopefully this video has given you a few things to think about. We've created quite a number of samples here, beginning with the white ink that we used here, and then we used some acrylic paint, the spray inks, we've used the baby wipe to remove some ink, then we used the chalk pastels, then we did like a reverse effect with some coloured inks and the bleeding tissue effect. And then just to show you, you know, it doesn't have to be circles, it can be any shape that you want. Hopefully that's given you a few ideas to try out yourself in different backgrounds, and just to have a rummage through what we've got. We've all got these things that just sit there. You maybe bought them for one purpose and haven't used them in a long time. I've not had my soft pastels out for a long time. I don't use the white spray ink. Maybe now I'll think about using these things in a different way and getting value for money out of the products that I have got. So if you enjoyed, as always, please leave me a thumbs up. It's much appreciated. Any comments that you have, I'll get back to you. I always do try and respond to comments. Apologies for any random noises going on in the background. It's a lovely day outside. There's people gardening, and there's lawnmowers and strimmers and all sorts of things, and people in the garden, children playing. So I'm hoping that that hasn't been a distraction on the video. I have no idea whether that's come through. And the last thing, if you're not already a subscriber, please think about subscribing, so you don't miss anything from me in the future. And I'll be back again with another project soon. Thanks a lot then. Bye.